That's something that I think I've been searching for my whole life, what it is to be a Filipino. And now, I'm going to be 70 this year, I think I can see that circle completing itself.
Hey, my beautiful son.
Well, I think this has definitely been a huge breakthrough for Dad, and also I think really for our family and for myself. When I came here, I was really pleasantly surprised, and in just just realizing what a big dream this actually was for me for many years, and I can only imagine what it was like for Dad.
I love the devotional quality of his work, but also just the depth of talent, as well as art history reference. So there's just so much in his work that relates to so many different people, which I love that, because I've been able to talk to young artists that, where they're used to seeing something like, a reference to religious art, when they go to Europe. But for some of the devotional artists today, there's a big pushback to bring up any kind of devotional conversation.
Well, my earliest memory would be back in about 1974, maybe? Yeah, playing volleyball on the beach in Laguna. Yeah.
What do you remember? Anything about the way he looked or what
He was drop dead gorgeous. I mean, like, drop dead gorgeous. Really? No, it's true.
I'm very proud of him. I think he's an incredible artist, very talented, and it's extremely consistent in his faith and so honest about his faith. No embarrassment, no hesitation. He just did what he thought he should do, even though he knew it wasn't going to be probably very easy to sell, but he just did what he felt he should do and he was called to do.
The subject of that painting is Cain and Abel. I wanted to build up texture on it, and those are old paintbrushes that I've worn the bristles off. And so I just pierced those through the canvas, sort of an act of violation. When she used to cut hair, like usually in the mornings before we play volleyball, so she would be in a hurry to get down to the beach and play, and then she'd have me dry the people's. After she cut it, I'd dry. Okay, Wayne, dry.
I don't even remember that.
So I'd dry, and then I eventually would watch her, and I think she took me to a hair show or two, and then I learned how to cut hair from her. And then I cut all my kids' hair, my wife's hair I still cut, saved thousands of dollars.
Wow.
I remember my Mr. Morez. He was a highway patrolman who became an art teacher, and he brought us here, and art's come so much further than that now in terms of what it can be. I really learned about great art here. Coming here feels like home. Like today when we pulled in, I thought, it's just like an island of refuge here. This is a painting by David Park. He painted up in the Bay Area. It was part of a school called Bay Area Figuration. They didn't try to smooth the paint out or take much care with it. They just let the paint do what paint does. And that's, I think, why I became a painter, because I just love that from the time I finger painted when I was 4 years old, just that ability to push paint around and squish it between your fingers and smear it around, and it just seemed like magic. Hey, this is an early painting by Philip Guston called The Room, 1954-55. But about 20 years ago, I discovered his work, and he's really the artist that I think has influenced me most in the last 20 years. I do like the painterliness of it, the way he let the marks of paint really appear. You can just imagine him there, kind of pushing the paint around. But his later work, he eventually in the 80s went into figuration when it was really out of style, when it was politically super incorrect. But he said no, that he didn't like all that purity. So he introduced the figure back into his work. And his work was very confessional. It was about him and his shortcomings. I don't know why, he just really allowed me to experiment with what I was doing. He gave me permission to do that by his work.
This was the first place Wayne took me after we met. And I hadn't been exposed to a lot of fine art in growing up in Brazil. And so to me, it was a huge new experience. And I remember asking him, how do you know what good art is and what bad art is, especially with something like this in the back of me? And I thought, a child could do it. And he just told me, well, you just have to see a lot of art. Well, first of all, there are a lot of concepts and things that go in it. But also to understand art, you have to see a lot of art. And you have to look at it for many years. And it's true, because I think through the years, after 37 years, I've understood a lot more just by being in museums and seeing art a lot.
And now I ask her for advice. When I think I finished a painting, I always show it to her and get her opinion before I sign it, you know. Mom didn't speak English very well, and I didn't speak Portuguese. So I spoke French, and she kind of understood that more, because it's closer to Portuguese. And we didn't need to talk that much, because we were just looking at art. That filled up the space, the quiet.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what future generations are going to want to see.
Deep in there. I mean, not how I make up.
So Grant, what's the story? Story of the garden. Yeah.
Those were the paintings I did when I was living in Brazil, in the neighborhood where I lived. And I just did these little close-ups of the houses as if they were portraits of people. And then say, oh, my house is nothing, you shouldn't paint it. I said, no, it's beautiful. Okay, I'm gonna bring you cafezinho.
Yeah, those are cool stories.
What made you decide to paint these houses?
Because each one was, you could really tell there was a statement. Like today, when we ran around, I had the same feeling. Each house I looked at, I thought, I can tell their personality that lives here. So this is the house where I grew up my adolescent years, maybe from age 11 to 21. And that's the garage there. On the left was my father's office. On the right is my bedroom. And I had a studio down there in the garage too. I could sneak in and out of that bedroom pretty easily when I was in high school.
To do what?
Just to, you know, fool around, go to parties, stay out after my curfew, stuff like that. Having the studio right below my bedroom was really a great option. After World War II, he was in the Philippines, and he was a really good golfer, and that's how he was able to make connections with higher-ups who played golf, locals as well as Army officers and was able to purchase a lot of surplus after the war, which he took to Australia and sold, and that became his nest egg. And with that money, I think he was able to have a lot of freedom and come here and establish the family here in 1953. My grandmother, Lola Benit, and my aunts, my aunt especially, Tita Nelly, came, and they would come and stay a month at a time. So that was my first introduction to the Filipino culture. And my grandmother would sort of set up shop in her bedroom, and she'd be sewing and making lampshades and kimonos, bathrobes, and I used to camp out there with her because I just loved that she was really creative with her hands. That's something that I couldn't share with anybody in the family. So here we are at Hope Ranch Beach, and this is a private beach. In the summer, there's a volleyball court here. This is where we learned how to play volleyball. This was called the slough. It was bigger than it seems like, but we'd throw each other in there if we were, I don't know, fighting or something like that. So that kind of marked me, the slough. Then I remember there's two lifeguard stands, and one of the lifeguards usually were kids from families who lived in Hope Ranch. And one of them, I think around 1968, he was drafted and he went to Vietnam and he was killed soon thereafter. So that's something I always think about down here, and that was a personal connection I had to that war. My grandparents sent, when they found out that my mother was in love with a GI after the war, they had a kind of a bad reputation for marrying local girls, starting a family, and then going back to the States. So they sent my mother and her sister to New York to finishing school to get away from my father. Well, they didn't know my father was from New York, so he went there and convinced her to marry him. They were married in St. Patrick's. The Filipino ambassador went, and my mother's other sister, and Susan Magalona, her best friend. But her parents would not come. And they sent word that they would only bless the union if they agreed to come back and live in Manila. And then my father returned that gesture by moving back to Manila for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And then they saw he was a serious guy and that he had some financial means. So they said, go live wherever you want. They wanted to get away from her family and his family and make a new start. That's how I always interpreted it. And then later on, I started painting down, not this beach so much as beaches in Southern California. It's such a cliche, so many artists do that. So at one point I turned around and I looked at the cliffs, and I loved how they were sort of a vertical landscape, which for a modernist painter liking to use a more compressed space, they were already right up to the picture plane, and I felt like that was really the kind of landscape that a modernist should paint, a vertical one, not a horizontal one that disappeared. My life here was pretty much between the swim team, swimming pool, and the art room. So this is the art room.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, I was a student here, class of 68.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And Bill Morez, did you know Bill Morez?
No.
Okay. He was the teacher here he must have taught here for 20 years at least.
Were you in this class?
Yeah, this was our classroom.
Was it like painting or drawing?
Painting, drawing.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, but a lot of memories here in this room.
Yeah.
This is just such a great room with that big north light. And
yeah, the north light is really good for drawing, painting.
Oh yeah.
Things like that. So.
I was in Santa Barbara, and I always was aware of how I was different from everybody else. I was the only Asian in our growing up in our class, You know, the ignorance of people, they would kind of make fun of me and call me Japanese or Chinese, and that really wreaked havoc with my identity. I really didn't know who I was or where I was from or if I should be ashamed to be from there, and why would I be ashamed to be from there. It wasn't until I lived in Europe and then started spending a lot of time in the Philippines that I sort of kind of understood how that racism works. Because even in the Philippines, I was always spotted as an American and followed in the street and called, "Hey Joe," you know, G.I. Joe. Then I could sort of understood that it wasn't really me, it's just the way things kind of played out when you were in the minority. I think there was a big silver lining because it made me always empathize with the underdog and try to take the side of the oppressed. And I think also in terms of Christianity, that's the role you're supposed to take. You're supposed to advocate for the poor and the underprivileged.
So I'd love to hear just...
Honey, I'm hard of hearing.
I'd love to hear just your memories of when you first met Wayne, what it was like teaching him, and kind of just the background.
I saw your desert picture down in the faculty lounge, and I was terribly impressed because I had been talking to my students about kinesthetic films. I said as soon as I saw it, this is a kinesthetic painting because you have to get close to it.
Because you want to know what that little line,
Indeed,
fuzzy line
yes.
is.
Uh-huh.
And only when you get close do you realize it's a caravan crossing the desert. So it pulls you over.
Yes. I could not believe how he could paint so gently, so easily, and it was like the sunrise.
You know, because my house, we were ultra conservative, but their house, they were very liberal politically and in other ways too. And so we could, one thing is we always had big conversations at the dinner table.
That's so huge. Very big conversations.
Yes,
Yeah.
at our house,
No,
you just ate silently.
And we
Conversations
could
about
always
what?
politics.
Politics.
And it was the Vietnam War. Everything was going on.
Yeah.
And
they were the only Democrats in Hope Ranch.
the only ones. I'm surprised they allowed us to buy property.
Yeah. But so I learned how to cook because I always just felt that was something really missing in our family. And what I loved about your family is we all would talk about food and cook in the kitchen. They had this huge kitchen and pull out the meat and look at it, and then all go into the dining room and all help set the table.
Where did that name come from? Was it French?
In a nutshell, yeah, she traced all the way back to the 1600s when our family were Huguenot, which are people who converted from Catholicism to Protestantism, and then they were persecuted because of that. So they went up to Holland, which in the north there were more Protestants up there, where Calvin came from and all that. And then they took those boats over little by little, those Hudson Bay Company boats to Canada. But then they find out that in that French part of Canada, Catholics could not own land, Protestants could not own land. So then they went down the St. Lawrence River to Albany area, Schenectady area, and settled there. But then my grandfather, after all that, he married an Irish woman.
That's what I was saying. Where's the Irish? Okay.
So then, of course, she raised my father.
Then we're back to Catholics.
Back to
After all that.
After all that work, and then we wound up Catholic again.
Wow.
So we went to this wedding and I remember the reception at somebody's house, and Wayne came to talk to me when I was by myself. And so we talked a little bit, and then he realized I was visiting from Brazil, and then he invited me to go to the museum. He was very, very gentle and very caring because he could tell I couldn't speak English that easily. He just was interested in what I was doing and asked me questions about that. Have you seen around? He wanted to kind of show me around. That was about it. Well, we went out one time, the first time we went out with his family, his mom and dad. He was introducing me in LA. And I thought because she was Filipina, I thought that I didn't understand very much Filipino. So I thought that we went to a Chinese restaurant, and I thought I had to use chopsticks. It turns out that they were very Americanized. They didn't even use chopsticks. So I'm there struggling my way through, thinking that I had to use chopsticks. That was a funny story. And then he came down in April 1980, and we got engaged 2 weeks later.
Did you think that was fast?
No, I knew we were going to get married. When I left California, I knew we were going to get married in my heart. Just knew it. I was really confident, and he wasn't yet sure, but when I left, then he became sure.
Do you remember the proposal?
Yeah, it was funny because he said, I need to talk to your parents. And I said, okay. So I go to the kitchen, and he's in the living room with my father. So then all of a sudden my father comes to the kitchen and says, I really would like you to come over and translate here, make sure that we're communicating. So my father's in front of me, and then Wayne, and then me on his right. And so he says to me, I would like to ask your father to marry you. So I tell my father, he's asking you if he can marry me. And he says, yeah, that's what I thought I understood, my father says.
Here we are at the Archaeological Museum, Mexico City, visiting Tiago and Lauren. The museum was mind-bending. It was just so much creativity. I never realized this about the Mexica culture and how rich it is and how many layers there are. It gave me a lot of insight into things that I can use in my own work. It's just taking the simple natural forms of the environment, people, the snails, the plants, whatever, and abstracting them into symbols. It's really powerful for me to see that. And the way how those symbols are really just so much more powerful than realism. And then they speak in a much higher plane, much more universally. I really like this painting because it hovers on the edge of abstraction and figuration. So you can see it as an abstract, or you can see it as two football players playing. We were talking about what's so great about painting as opposed to the new technology, like video, film, all these sort of things. And you were saying those all unfold in time. You have to devote time to them, whereas painting, you get it on the first glance. You can keep looking at it, or you can just stay with that first shock. But you get it all instantaneously. Someone said that painting is like a film that you edit down to one frame.
Ele é 10 anos mais velho que eu. Então ele sempre foi um exemplo de pessoa ligada em Deus, na moral, sobretudo na moral cristã, nos valores da família e tudo mais. Isso foi sedimentando uma amizade muito forte, que hoje até a gente se chama de irmãos.
Há uns 20 anos atrás, quando vocês vieram fazer a experiência de morar em Campos do Jordão, nós temos muitas memórias desta época de convivência. Assim, eu lembro muito bem seu pai chegando sempre com uma sacolinha de supermercado, trazendo algum quitute, trazendo alguma coisa para ser preparada em conjunto, porque esse é o detalhe. Não se tratava de comprar alguma coisa pronta, nós sempre gostamos de fazer juntos.
O seu pai não gosta nada sofisticado. Ele faz o simples ficar sofisticado. Ele alugou uma casa, tinha 100 anos. Tinha fogão que tinha que fazer lenha. Chuveiro era meio... Não era um chuveiro gostoso, era um chuveiro meio morno. A cama não era aquela cama que você tá com casa climatizada. E não foi uma coisa para vocês sofrerem. Ao contrário, não faltava nada, tinha tudo. Com muita abundância, muito amor, muita alegria. Ele quis que vocês vivessem o simples. A comida sentada na mesa. Ele sempre fez questão de agradecer a Deus por aquele alimento e por quem fez. Eu lembro de uma coisa muito interessante, que ele foi ao diretor da escola pública, que tinha gente muito pobre, e falou, posso dar aula para eles de arte? Você sabe onde era a aula? Era no mercado. Só podia ser coisa que seu pai gosta. Tinha um canto lá no mercado, as crianças iam lá, os pais, e naquele dia ele dava uma aula sobre Louvre. Olha, sabe
Muito
que existe
legal.
o Louvre? Ah, que isso? É um museu. E aqui em casa nós tivemos o privilégio de ter 2 obras dele. Quando a gente estava construindo a casa, eu trouxe seu pai aqui, só tinha tijolo. Ah, aqui vai... Ele falou, eu vou pôr um quadro aqui e outro ali. E esse quadro, então, aqui em casa retrata as nossas famílias reunidas, mas sempre com Jesus no meio.
Uma mosquinha aqui, chata.
É um robô cinemático.
Ele podia, mesmo sendo americano, mesmo tendo casado com brasileira, não dar importância para falar a língua. Eles foram insistentes em que vocês aprendessem também. Tem um bairro em São Paulo chama bairro Liberdade, que é só da colônia japonesa, ou maior parte da colônia japonesa. Ele levava a gente lá, aí ele reservava aquelas salinhas específicas, você tem que tirar o sapato. Aí tinha todo o ritual de servir.
Eu lembro disso, fica tão marcado, porque era tão diferente do normal. A mesa redonda, aí tinha que colocar ovo cru, com arroz e passar carne, aquilo lá já era um, né?
So I really embraced Brazilian culture because I thought, at that point, I thought, yeah, this is really what I always felt was missing as an American. You know, some other kind of Latino culture, or that seemed to fill a void that I felt.
Why was it important to you that we have Brazilian culture and language?
Well, on one hand, so you could talk to your grandparents who didn't speak English, and that was very important, but also just so you would have another cultural viewpoint besides the American one.
Why was that important?
Well, I just think it's important to be able to see things from several points of view, not just one. I think that was one of the main themes in my life. The things that I really valued was seeing things from different points of view. Makes you safer, you know, because people can't deceive you as easily.
What do you want to be remembered for?
Well, first for having embraced God and having embraced life and having embraced people, having embraced the arts and culture, maybe for being a fair person, a person who was passionate about things, who took risks, who loved.
O Wayne tem uma facilidade de se adaptar muito facilmente a qualquer degrau. Entende?
Qualquer nível social.
Exatamente, nível social.
Não, fazia aquele sanduíche comprido nos piqueniques, isso era bem clássico dele. Fazia os cookies e fazia aquele, sabe aquele, tinha o eggnog que ele trouxe também. Não, a cozinha, de estar na cozinha, de ter interesse pela cozinha era uma coisa Não existe isso aqui.
Quando ele olhava pra você assim, sabe? E fazia uma cara tipo assim, aí você fala, ai, pronto, ele vai falar alguma coisa, vamos vir cortar o cabelo, vamos lá. Porque ele tinha a visão dele, né, de artista que...
I like to do stories over and over, say 1 or 2 every year, because I have a different take on it. I'm more mature in the faith, and so I see it maybe in a more subtle way, in a deeper way, hopefully. Cain and Abel, Jacob and the angel. Those are themes that I've come back to, you know, maybe dozens of times each. And these are stories, I think, that are made to be revisited constantly over a lifetime because, like the parables, they're so human and they touch such deep parts of our humanity that you can come back over and over and over. And I document that revisitation with a painting, so that's like an added benefit. And then I wind up with another painting. Just as an example of how the painting can speak back to me, I think it was my idea to make this figure almost like a Christ crucified type figure. But then once I did that, the eye of the whale became important because it's an all-knowing eye, almost like the eye of God. And so then I really saw how the serpent, or the whale, or the sea monster, almost became like a vehicle or a stand-in for God, offering his son up. This is a painting it's called The Brown Man's Burden, 2012. It's from a passage in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 6:42. It says, "Why do you try to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your own eye?" And what I did is sort of portray that pretty literally. It's kind of a play on words, the brown man's burden, because we always hear of the white man's burden. It's the white man's burden to go and colonize the people of color and teach them how they should govern themselves and behave. But actually here, by saying the brown man's burden, I'm showing that the white man is the brown man's burden, and just putting up with him and his ways is the burden in this case. Maybe 15 years ago, Tita Makai, who's now the matriarch here in Silay, she and her 3 daughters came, knocked on our door and said, "I remember you when you were a baby in Manila, and I just came to tell you that you have a whole bunch of relatives in the Philippines." So she's the one who made me aware, and then that just stuck in my mind for several years, just percolating, and I thought, yeah, I am going to really find out where I'm from, what it's like, and what it feels like to be a Filipino, because that's something I always just tried to spackle over, but I always felt there was a hole there somewhere in my heart and in my brain that that information was missing. Here we are at the National Museum in front of Juan Luna's Spoliarium. It's painted in Rome, and it won the prize for best painting in Madrid at the Bellas Artes, and was used to prove that Filipinos were in no sense inferior to the Spanish. So here we are at the Yuchenko Museum in Makati, and this is a show of Amar Solo, who was my grandmother's painting teacher and the national artist for her generation. And he was famous for presenting this idealized pastoral view of the
Philippine countryside in the province, where all the maidens are perfectly dressed and no one sweats, no one works. Well, they work, but they're all having fun planting rice and harvesting sugarcane. There's one I noticed over there, which he did a series of Manila on fire. At the end of the Second World War, the Japanese had occupied Manila, and the Americans were trying to get them out, and they wouldn't leave. So America tragically had to bomb the city of Manila. My grandparents were here during that time, and they all fled for the mountains up to Baguio. And the story was they were selling their jewelry just to get enough milk for, I guess, the next generation, the kids.
We're commuting by tricycle with our driver here in the Philippines.
We barely fit in the chair.
We're in a two-person cart. So low to the ground.
Lacson is a very old traditional family here and very well known. The main street in Bacolod is called Lacson Street. But here you belong to a big family, and they have a big legacy that goes back to the revolution against Spain, and you can really place yourself in the century, several centuries. Yeah, here we are in Bacolod, and we just happened to come upstairs and find this exhibit that the museum has done of using my work to celebrate the local liberation from the Spanish day. This is a painting called Itneg, Rusty or Ralph. This would be an Itneg tribesman, and this is their indigenous dress. But because of globalization, they're getting access to cell phones, and here everyone has a cell phone, no matter which class they're from. This large painting is called Kalinga Warrior, and the subject is a tribesman from that indigenous tribe. They always interested me because they have beautiful textiles, and they mix them in really interesting ways too. I always thought they could just walk out on a runway in Paris or something like that. They look so noble and elegant. They're for my own pleasure, but they're also for the Filipino community to see the beauty I see in their culture and the interest, because in a lot of these there's inside jokes too. So just maybe the value of these would be maybe the viewpoint from a balikbayan, which is someone who left here and now has come back. To me, what's much more important now is telling a story, is getting information to another person that they can wrestle with or recognize even. I think it's a big tragedy. Like a lot of artists strive to be remembered by posterity, by all these people they don't even know, and it's their family that suffer for it, and they remember them badly because they feel ignored and put in second place. That whole art world is so fickle anyway as an institution. It's just constantly changing, and now it's just changing so fast. Robert Hughes, the Times art critic, called it the tyranny of the new. They just have a new movement just because it's new. So I'm really disenchanted with all that, and have been for quite a while. But no, for me it's more important to be remembered by the people that I love and love me far more important. Our most famous relative was named Aniceto Lacson, and he had a friend named Juan Araneta. But they both had a theater group that they would meet and put on plays and stuff. When the Spanish-American War started, they decided that they would play a trick on the few Spaniards that were here. There was maybe 6 or 7 Spanish soldiers here. So they made uniforms and used rattan and coconuts to make cannons and bamboo to make guns. And they outfitted their whole theater troupe to look like a military force from a distance. And they met here in the middle, near the Spanish garrison. And when they saw the military force that was coming, approaching them, they rigged up a white flag and waved it. And then so someone went there and took them prisoner and put them in the jail. Then the rest of the Philippines was still fighting against the Spanish. So we were the first ones to really conquer the Spanish. And this became, for I think 3 months or something like that, the Cantonal Republic of Negros. So we were an independent, sovereign nation, island nation, for 3 months. When I got here to the province, not in Manila, which is like pretty much like any big city, but especially here in Negros, I just saw in my cousins, I saw my brothers and sisters in them. I saw so many behaviors and attitudes that reminded me of my mother or the nursemaids or my aunts, and whereas before they just seemed like curious alien attitudes, here they all made sense. Attitudes about family, about leisure, about community. It's very, very strong community here. They get together every Sunday for lunch. They have a big potluck and they rotate houses, about 5 big houses, but there's maybe 40 to 60 people there every Sunday. So we all know each other and they just love to be together. I just saw a little boy run down the beach trying to catch up with his father, who was already preparing the boat to go out, and then his mother and his sister were trailing him. And this little brown boy with his round face and black hair and just so innocent and so evocative of me at that age. But I think what's important now is to just connect my past to my present, which I feel was really disrupted when I left here, not knowing anything more than just sensory information. I think I finally come more or less full circle, where I can feel what it is to be a Filipino. I know this island where I'm from pretty well after about 20 trips now. And I feel like I can really embrace that young boy running down the beach that I was, maybe for the first time. Yeah, I'm very thankful for this gift that I recognized since I was very young, and I think I've handled it fairly well. I've respected it and treated it well, and I've had a lot of support along the way by good education, and my father never understood that desire to paint I had, but on the other hand, he supported me, and I think to the right degree, you know, just kept me from starving. It's probably the right degree. But that's all, I think, good for a painter, to really starve a bit and learn about what it is to suffer. I always think Christ said, I came to bring you life and life more fully. And I think, why didn't he say life more richly or comfortably or luxuriously? He said fully, you know? And I think, yeah, that means that you should really, he came to bring you the joy but the pain, and the rich but the poor, you know, the whole thing. And St. Paul confirmed that by saying, you know, he could be comfortable in any situation, with the rich and powerful or with the poor and destitute. It's fine. You know, he could see Christ in anybody.